not only had Harrison Ford not signed on for the use of his likeness, neither had Mark Hamill or Carrie Fisher. So their characters, Luke and Leia, are both in the book, obviously, but he couldn't show their faces. Now, he could have painted other faces onto the characters, but obviously that's not what you want with a sequel to a movie. So that's why he painted the two characters from behind. Darth Vader, of course, doesn't have that problem. So that's why the cover painting appeared that way. And as with anything else, it never occurred to me to say, George, could I, if you don't have any use for it, it's just a book cover, it has nothing to do with the film, could I have the book cover painting, or could I buy it? You don't think of these things at the time. You always think of them after the fact. So, having completed the novelization, which George was very happy with, and which includes some things which are not in the original cut of the film, of course, I went home, went back to work on the book, on the sequel novel. The only stricture that George put on it was, he said, I want you to write a book that can be filmed on a low budget. Because he had the idea, always thinking ahead, that if Star Wars made a little money, but not a lot of money, then he could make a cheap sequel using existing props and backgrounds and costumes. That's why I set the whole thing on a fog-shrouded planet. Reduces your need for expensive backgrounds. I finished the book, and I went to a meeting at Universal. The film is still in production, remember. Went to a meeting at Universal because George didn't have any offices. He wasn't up in San Anselmo. He's renting space, which is what independent producers do. They rent space on movie lot. And there was this old bungalow, probably from the 1930s. I think they're all gone now, which is a shame. And I had a meeting with George and Gary Kurtz, who was the producer, and a man named Charlie Lippincott, who was the director of publicity for the upcoming film. And we discussed the book very briefly because the three of them were busy with the movie. And George said, I really like the book, I'm very happy with the book, but I want you to please take out the first chapter. The first chapter, for those of you who've read the book, was originally a fairly complex battle in space, which is what forces Luke and Leia down onto this planet. And the reason George had me take it out had nothing to do with the way it was written or the way the action was described. Can anybody think why he had me take it out based on what I've already said?
Money.
Yeah, it would have been very expensive to film. He didn't feel it was, could have stayed in the book, didn't cost anything to put it in the book. But if he ever got around to filming it, it would have been costly to shoot. So I cut that out, and that was about it. Everything else stayed, which didn't matter, it was fine at the time. However, in light of subsequent films, there are some interesting things from the book that people have remarked upon, and we'll talk about in a minute. In relation to my contract, the novelization was what's called a work for hire. Now, sometimes with a novelization, you get an advance against royalties. Sometimes you just get a flat fee. It's up to the author whether to do it this way or not. With Splinter, which was an original novel, I had a fairly standard royalty based on the sales of the book. But while we're sitting in the meeting, George said, by the way, I'm giving you a 0.5% royalty on the novelization. And I said, George, you don't have to do that. Now, this is against the advance, remember. I said, you don't have to do that, George. I'm, sign the contract. I'm very happy with it. And he said, no, you did a good job. I want you to have a 0.5%. Well, I left the meeting thinking, well, that was very sweet of him, but it's not going to amount to anything. I don't buy any Rolls Royces off it, but over the years, as my wife and I were struggling, it was nice. And I still get money from that 0.5%. Not a lot, but after how many decades it's been, it's still a nice thing to see show up twice a year. It's very small, but it brings back nice memories. After the meeting is over, George goes one way with Gary, and Charlie Lippincott, the director of publicity, calls me over and says, come here, I want to show you something. And over in a closet, over in the corner, it's a closet, and it's filled with publicity materials for the movie. Program books for the premiere of the film, for when it's going to be released. T-shirts, posters. And Charlie says, do you want any of this stuff? I said, no, what am I going to do with all this? Yeah, always the operative. My My wife never lets me, women never forget, but never mind aliens. There were a bunch of those. I did get one thing. I said, I'll take a T-shirt for my wife. And I got one of the production T-shirts, which was the one I described to you earlier with the first Ralph McQuarrie thing. And it says, The Star Wars. And it shows the name, Luke and Leia and Chewbacca, and they all look very different than they eventually did, because this is promotional artwork that was done before the film was even cast. So unfortunately, I have one old T-shirt somewhere in the house, probably the most valuable thing in the house, I think. But that's what happened with that. So that's the story behind how I came to do the novelization of Star Wars and Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the first sequel book. Subsequent to the release of the film, George made a little money, and he didn't have to do a second film on a low budget. He was able to do exactly what he wanted, and he did Empire Strikes Back, and of course Return of the Jedi, and here we are, 40 years later, and now J.J. Abrams is going to switch over apparently from Star Trek to do Star Wars, and I've done Star Trek work. It's very strange the way this has all come about. You never plan your life. It all happens. Life hinges on very small things. So it's been a lot of fun. I did one more book in the Star Wars universe. They were after me for years after it became, as many books as the Bible. But I didn't really want to do a spin-off book per se. I didn't want to do a book about Chewbacca's second cousin and what happened to Han Solo when his third kid got married or whatever. There were just so many spin-off books. But a few years ago, they approached me and said, we'd like you to do a book that bridges episode 1 and episode 2 in the new chronology. And you can take a character or a situation from the first film and do whatever you want with it, essentially. The difference was that with the first book, with Splinter, and with the novelization of the original film, all I had to do was show it to George and have George say yes. With The Approaching Storm, which was the book I eventually wrote, I had to go up to Skywalker Ranch. I was there for 2 days in meetings with half a dozen people, because everything now has to be approved by committee, and there are committees to approve what committees do. They have a guy. You talk about the nerd's ultimate job, Star Wars nerd's ultimate job. This guy, and maybe a different guy now, so there's no point in mentioning names, his job was to come into Skywalker Ranch 5 days a week, 9 to 5, and do absolutely nothing but coordinate spin-off stuff and make sure that the drink cup from Burger King, which features Jar Jar Binks, doesn't contradict the image of Jar Jar Binks that's on the kids' bed sheets that are being produced by Wamsuda. I mean, this is all this guy did. He had this gigantic roll of stuff. That's all he did. That was his living. That was his salaried job, was to make sure this didn't contradict anything else. And that's basically what the committee was doing. And they would say, well, we don't think this character would act this way, and maybe you should change this here. And all I could think of at the time was how easy it had been the first time around. In the 70s, George said, go home and write a sequel novel. I did that. George read it. He said, take out the first chapter. That was the end of it. And this happens all the time with novelizations and spin-off material in Hollywood now. 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't such a big deal. Now, all the producers want to get involved. They all want to get involved. The last couple of novelizations I did, which were for Star Trek, the new Star Trek movie, and now Star Trek Into Darkness, which I've also done, which will be out, I think, 4 days after the movie next month. It got rewrites and rewrites and rewrites, because they're constantly re-editing, they're constantly changing. And whereas before they didn't care if the book reflected the movie exactly, now they want the book to reflect the movie as closely as possible. Which is fine, except these days they do digital editing. So they change the whole film in 24 hours if they want to. It's not as easy to change a book in 24 hours, but that's kind of what you have to do. It's better when they leave you alone. When I was doing the Alien books, I did the book version, the first Alien film, and then Aliens, and then Alien 3. Well, I thought Alien 3 was a pretty bad movie. It was a pretty bad script. So I went in and did what I like to do, what anybody would like to do, what you do when you sit in the theater with your friends and you look at something on screen and say, that's stupid, why didn't they do it this way? That's all I do, that's what I get to do. That's where a lot of the satisfaction in doing this comes from. So with Alien 3, I had a lot of things to fix. I don't know how many of you remember Alien 3, but the first thing they do is kill the little girl and do an autopsy on her, and I thought that was just obscene. And I said that in print. So I said, well, in the book, the way I had it set up was that her cryo capsule is cracked, and they can't take her out because it would kill her, so they leave her in there still alive. Excuse me. That way, she's not involved in the story, but she's not dead either. I thought killing her removed Ripley's motivation for staying alive. I mean, it didn't make any sense to me story-wise. And I did a lot of other things. All of those criminals in that who were on that crazy prison planet, I gave them all backgrounds. Why is this guy here? Why is this guy here? Things like that. Remember a scene, there's a huge pile of used batteries, and two of the characters are sitting there trying to get batteries that might still have some juice in them so their flashlights will work. You have to excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what, 200-300 years in the future, and we're still using D-cells. Something wrong with the technology here. It's because people in Hollywood generally don't understand science fiction. A lot of them have grown up now with science fiction, so they understand it a lot better. But you still have old-line Hollywood people that have no clue what it's about. Does anybody have any questions? Star Wars, Star Trek, aliens? Go back. Otherwise, I can just blabber all afternoon. Yes, in the middle.
Yeah, can you give us some of your favorite memories of working with Star Trek?
Favorite memories of working with Star Trek? Well, as I said, Star Trek is the reason I live in Prescott. So there's not a lot of whole favorite memories. I got involved with Star Trek because Judy Lynn had found a loophole in the contract that Manta Books had signed with Paramount. Manta Books thought they had bought the rights to do any book versions of Star Trek throughout the universe forever. I've got my, we'll take it anyway. Judy Lynn found out that it didn't say animated films in the contract between Paramount and Manta. And lo and behold, Filmation Studios did 2 years of animated Star Trek on Saturday morning. Well, Judy Lynn immediately bought the rights. That was the meeting that I sat in on at 20th Century Fox, where the lawyer for Fox was trying to explain to Judy Lynn that no, they really couldn't buy those rights, and Judy Lynn was taking him apart like a plucked chicken, explaining why she already bought the rights, and she really could. So I ended up novelizing the whole series, basically. There were, I don't remember how many episodes, somebody probably knows, something like 20, 22 episodes. And these were 20-minute cartoon strips, basically Saturday morning cartoons. I didn't see how I was going to get a novel out of a 20-minute cartoon script. And I told Judy Lynn that. She said, well, just do it however you think's best. So what I ended up doing was making a novella out of each screenplay and putting 3 in each book and tying them together as best I could so it would read at least nominally like a real novel. What happened was they became so successful that I got a call from Judy Lynn, and she said, look, you've got to do 1 script per book. We've got to stretch this out as long as we can. And I said, I've only got 4 scripts left that I haven't novelized. She said, I don't care. You've got to get 1 book per script. So I said, if I could do that, I would have done that in the first place. Judy Lynn was very persuasive. So I'm thinking, well, what can I do? I said, well, all right, I'll make a novella out of each one like I've been doing all along. And then I'll add 2/3 original material. I'll just write original material for the rest of the book. And that's why the last 4 of the Star Trek logs, which is what the series is called, read that way. The first third is the novelization of whatever teleplay was left, and the last 2/3 are original material.